All right. For today's episode of Breakthrough Marketing Secrets, we're going to have a little bit of a different interview because this is somebody who's not in direct response, but somebody who I respect tremendously. Brian Ardinger, we'll get to your bio in a minute, but I want to start off since you're in the trenches, like you're neck deep in innovation all day long. I want to ask you, why is innovation so important, even essential for entrepreneurs today?
Well, I've been talking about innovation for probably my entire career, and until about maybe 2.5 years ago, when you said, "Hey, you need to prepare for change, and you need to prepare to be more adaptable," in that, not everybody got it. And then I
Yeah.
think COVID kind of changed the layout of the land there, and everybody now I think kind of understands what disruption actually means, and more understanding that to get through that disruption, you have to innovate. You have to be able to create new things with your ideas, and that's kind of everything that I've been doing over the last couple decades of my life has been focused on how do we create more builders, makers, doers, and creators.
These are the proven direct response marketing, copywriting, and entrepreneurship success strategies you can use today to write your own ticket and create the life you want. I am Roy Furr, and this is Breakthrough Marketing Secrets. Now, here's today's breakthrough. Awesome. So now we're reaching this crest of the wave where it's just becoming, it's time to surf, right? Brian Ardinger is the founder of Inside Outside, which is a community for innovative entrepreneurs that also offers a weekly podcast and newsletter. There will be a link in the description to check that out. He is also the director of innovation at Nelnet here in Lincoln, Nebraska. And he spent over 25 years helping entrepreneurs navigate and compete in a world of change and disruption. He has clients, everything from like the brand new startup, or even the person who wants to be a brand new startup, all the way up to clients like Pepsi, Target, Nike, Mazda, Harley Davidson, Royal Caribbean, Microsoft, IBM, HP, Gartner, and he is a leader in the Silicon Prairie, which is where I met him. We're both based in Lincoln, Nebraska. And he is a name that pretty much everybody that's involved with tech innovation in the Midwest, they know his name. They know he's been a driving force in the startup community in Lincoln, Nebraska. And he's the author of the new book, Accelerated, A Guide to Innovating at the Speed of Change, which was my excuse for having him on. Brian, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's Roy. It's been a couple of years since we sat down at a coffee shop and just talked about innovation and entrepreneurship, and it's glad to see all the stuff that you're building as well.
Yes, well, thank you. So let's dive in. You have a chapter near the beginning of your book called "The Forces of Accelerating Change," and so you mentioned COVID in your initial answer there, but that's just a fraction of what's behind the accelerating change in our world right now. So can you speak to how change is kind of coming to a head and coming at us from all different angles and forcing us to think about this at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started writing this book about a month before COVID kind of hit. And again, the original book was going to be about how you needed to get prepared for a lot of these upcoming changes. And COVID wasn't in the book initially, but I saw all these converging forces. And, when we think about innovation, obviously our mind goes towards technology, and you look at all the technology forces that are changing the landscape, whether it's, artificial intelligence or robots or self-driving cars, or, name any one of these technologies that you hear about. And any one has the chance to really change an industry or change a person's trajectory. And yet they're all hitting at once. And so it was imperative to talk about not only technology and the things that are happening in this cumulative effect that they're having, but all the other things that technology is leading to, whether it's access to markets. So if you think about it from an entrepreneur perspective, 20 years ago when I was in this entrepreneur space, to get a company off the ground, you had to have a big ad budget. You had to go to, there's certain places you can go for media in that, but now you can really target and access markets, micro markets that you could never access before. So you've got, technology, you've got markets, you've got things like just the abundance of access to people, these network effects where you can access talent anywhere around the world now. And all these things are changing the landscape. But I think more importantly, it really flips things on the edge, because anybody now can be a creator, and anybody can have the opportunity to create something and take their idea and create something of value from that. Where in the past you had to have more capital, more access to tools and things like that. And it's just making it easier to experiment and try things.
Okay, so I totally agree. Like the capacity to get a business off the ground, even like as I got started with a copywriting business, like a business consulting business, the internet was kind of coming into its own.
Yes.
So instead of me having to like find these people all over the world and maybe like cold call them or send them a direct mail piece to introduce myself as a copywriter, I was able to email people. I was able to connect with people. I was getting emails, which
Right.
gave me access to all of that. And that's, geez, like close to 20 years ago at this point. And all of this has continued to compound in its benefits, but it also um, creates uncertainty in markets and for individuals. So like what's the what's the dark side of all this accelerating change too? Like what's the
So,
uh
yeah, I think quite frankly, a lot of people aren't prepared for this. If you think about, especially people in, I guess, maybe traditional corporate environments, if you
okay.
think about a traditional corporation, they've figured out their business model, and their job is to optimize and execute on that particular business model and continue to grow. But a lot of the plan is kind of built out, and your job is to execute the plan. Where if you flip the stage, whether it's an entrepreneur or quite frankly, the world that we're living in right now, you have to be much more of an explorer. Because the plans are not, laid out in stone. You don't know that if you take step A, B, and C, you're going to get to where you need to go, because everything has changed along that journey. And so I think, more than ever, we've got to think about what are the skill sets, the tool sets, the mindset that you need to be more adaptable and to kind of create your own path, whether you're in an existing company or whether you're building your own from scratch.
Okay, so essentially like this, I'm imagining like the big corporations, and if each one
Mhm.
is represented by their logos, and that's like their business model and all of that is represented by their logos. It's like what we're seeing right now is those logos are cracking, the business models are cracking, and it's causing like each of those cracks becomes an opportunity, and it's
Right.
either an opportunity for someone inside that business to patch the crack and maybe create something better. uh, I think there's this Japanese art of taking like broken or maybe it's Chinese, like broken teacup and patching it, and it's considered to be better than the original when it's been like recreated. Um, and there's an opportunity to do that, or that crack is just going to continue to grow and fissure and create an
Right.
opportunity for entrepreneurs. And so then the opportunity comes to the person who has read your book Accelerated. I mean, somebody who understands innovation. So I think you have a unique perspective on this. And so I do want to get into your background a little bit, and your experiences and how that has
Sure.
contributed to this. So right now your position is in this big publicly traded company. It's known for being in the student loans business, but also functions as a startup accelerator itself, right? It has a whole segment of it. So constantly creating companies. But you also have a background, like you were connected to the local university, and you formed a startup accelerator that was connected to the community and the university, as
Right.
far as I understand it. So there were startups coming up through that, and we're just scratching the surface. So, like, how has this idea and this drive to understand innovation and drive innovation, how has that come out of your background and your
Yeah.
experiences? And can you share something about that?
Yeah. So I think I got a lot of kind of the tactics of how do you innovate from working with startups. So, about 10 years ago, I started the first accelerator program here in Nebraska called Motion. Still going on along today. It's been driven right now by Generator, which is a accelerator program out of Madison and Milwaukee. And when we first started, it was really an experiment. I was the entrepreneur in residence at New Tech Ventures, which was the tech transfer arm of the university. And I went in there, I think originally to maybe find some technology and spin it out. But when I got in there, I saw this huge opportunity between that was missing in our local ecosystem, and the opportunity to try to double down and create early stage companies and help early stage entrepreneurs accelerate their journey. So whether that was access to capital, access to mentors, just access to the things that they need, and take that long 2-year lonely journey that a lot of entrepreneurs go through, and try to accelerate it, and bring the right people together to help on along that path. And as I did that for a couple of years and helped 20 plus companies kind of incubate and get started, I learned a lot about what it takes to take that early initial seed of an idea and then incrementally move that forward to a point where you actually have some value creation. And I think a lot of that portion of that journey of success is unknown by a lot of people. They see the success stories after the fact. They hear about Steve Jobs in his garage with Wozniak, and years later they've got the $1 trillion company. But we don't always see the beginning stages and what it really takes, and what was the initial idea, and how did that change from the idea that took off, and all that kind of stuff. And so I spent a lot of time, working with entrepreneurs and trying to understand that process, things like lean startup methodologies and just customer discovery and understanding what a customer really wants versus what they say they want. And then through that journey, I got pulled into the corporate realm because corporates kept coming to me saying, how are these companies moving so fast? And how do I get in touch with them? And how do I work with them? And how do I kind of get that mojo? Because we know we have to innovate faster, better, smarter, but we don't have it. We don't have that in our DNA. Yeah. And so I started the podcast Inside Outside Innovation as a way to help tell those stories. So we interviewed corporates who were doing this, and startup founders and venture capital, and to try to tell the stories of what it takes to create these things. We started a newsletter, and then we started an annual conference where we brought these people together with the idea of bringing the ties and the t-shirts in the same room and see what happens when you explore this concept of innovation. And so I would say through that journey, it allowed me to see a lot of things at the earliest stages and kind of take some of the things that seemed to be working and also identify some of the things that weren't working, and then apply that to creation of, startup or enterprise within a company.
Yeah. So would you say that like that process that you started to narrow down, whether you're involved in a startup by the traditional sense, sure, or like a entrepreneur startup, is your 1, 2, 3, 4 framework like relevant to that, or?
So let me talk through it. So in the book, I talk about there's kind of 3 engines of innovation that if you're going to accelerate your innovation efforts, you really have to focus on 3 key areas. And the first is explore, your exploration engine. And that's really all about identifying and getting more ideas into your funnel. It's about exploring different industries. It's about exploring different ways of, people that you meet, and collisions of different ideas from that perspective. And, once you accelerate your exploration, it helps identify ideas that can crash into each other, and hopefully find some ones that actually take place.
Yes.
The second engine is the engagement engine, which is really how do you take those ideas and then start socializing them and getting feedback, whether it's feedback in the market by talking to customers, or feedback from colleagues to see which of these particular ideas has some legs and which ones show some evidence that they might work. And then the third engine is the experimentation engine. It doesn't really matter if you have all these ideas if you don't take action on it. And the experimentation engine's all about how do you take action on these ideas and incrementally move them forward to de-risk the idea and create value along that path. And so I developed a 1, 2, 3 methodology to really just get in the headspace of what it takes to move an early idea forward. And so the concept is 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 is 1 minute. 2 is 2 hours, 3 is 3 days, and 4 is 4 weeks. Each particular bucket is just a little bit more increment of time as you identify what's needed in this bucket. So the 1 minute bucket is you're constantly jotting down with 1 minute, what are the ideas, problems that you see, and getting used to building up that inflow, that funnel of ideas. From that funnel, the first 1 minute that you've jotted down, at some point, some of those ideas are going to kind of come to the surface. You're going to be thinking about it more often. And you say, well, let me double down on that. So I'm going to spend 2 hours, the next stage, to flesh that out a little bit more. Maybe I'm going to do a little research. Is there anybody else doing this? How often do I see this problem? Who has it? Kind of outline what the problem is. If after that 2 hours, during that process, that 2 hours, you're also maybe asking a couple friends or your colleagues or a couple customers, are you seeing this? What do you see in this space? After that 2 hours, if you have enough evidence to say, hey, we should probably spend a little bit more time. There seems to be something here. Then you take maybe a 3-day sprint to do some further research, do some customer discovery. And at the 3 days, then you can, again, reevaluate and say, do I have enough evidence to put the next block of time, money, resources into it? And that may be a 4-week sprint where you're building a prototype, for example. And it's just a way to think through. And then at each block, kind of take note of not what you feel about what the idea is, but do you actually have evidence that you should be spending more time or money or resources to move that idea forward?
I really appreciate that. Like, this is one of the things that I really feel like there's a huge overlap between the direct response world, which is where I play more, and a lot of my subscribers play more, and especially like the lean startup world. When I read Lean Startup, I thought that's scientific advertising applied to creating businesses.
Right.
And this is very much, I love the thinking behind this, because what you've described is not necessarily, oh, let's come up with some new technology or some like new, I don't know, social media site or something, right? Yeah. It could be used in that context, right? Like if you're trying to create the next TikTok or whatever, you could use the 1, 2, 3, 4 to figure out if it's something that you could get 100 users for, right? Or if you're trying to figure out what your next marketing funnel is going to be, you could have a bunch of 1-minute ideas that you just capture. You could have some 2-hour kind of exploration of what kind of traction that idea might get. You could run a survey that takes 3 days that gathers some data about how people are responding to maybe a few of your different 1-minute ideas. And then over 4 weeks, you could create just a test campaign to see if it gets any kind of traction in the market and is worth rolling out.
It's a great point, because I think oftentimes we think of innovation, we have to come up with the business idea, the next self-driving car, the next light bulb, whatever. But innovation really is taking a seed of an idea and creating value from that idea, and that could be a new product feature that you want to test or something like that. So the methodology and the thought process behind it really applies, again, whether you're creating a brand new company from scratch that's going to dominate the world, to I'm working within a team and I just need to innovate more effectively and get some more ideas out there and see if there's something there.
I have any kind of offer, any kind of product in the marketplace, and I need to know what 2.0 is going to look like, right? Like, okay, that's excellent. So in this context, how do I want to ask this next question? I guess if you're working with a brand new business, what does the innovation process look like for that versus, okay, I'm working inside, and obviously you don't necessarily need to tell a Nelnet story, but I'm working inside a bigger company like Nelnet. What does the innovation process look like there, where maybe the resources are different, the stakes are different, et cetera? The stakeholders are different.
So part of it is trying to understand where that idea initially sits. So for example, in an existing company, big company, they've got existing customers, they've got existing markets, they have existing products. And so the idea that's coming out, is it something that is kind of very close to the core of something you're already doing? So, what we call Horizon 1 type of innovation, where you're kind of optimizing or tweaking or experimenting around things that you already pretty much know, but there's something different to it. Or is it further out on the horizon? Is it a Horizon 2 or Horizon 3? Horizon 2 being it's adjacent to what you're currently building. And then finally, Horizon 3 is more transformational, brand new idea, brand new market, brand new editor, whatever. So I think first is both understanding that innovation happens along those horizons. And the closer to the core, the more likely you are to have a lot of knowns in that. Like you maybe know the customer, the products, you have access to resources that you wouldn't have at a transformational type of idea. So first is taking stock in where's that idea sit? Because each type of idea is going to execute a little bit differently. So if you're coming up with a brand new transformational idea, it's going to take you longer. There's far more unknowns. There's more tests you're going to have to do, but the potential upside may be massive. And so you have to balance that out. You may also be able to do a lot of Horizon 1 ideas because they're, again, close to the core. You can execute on it. You have particular methodologies you can put into play. And so the first thing is kind of understanding innovation and the horizons around it and where does that kind of sit? Because then you can get into the same 1, 2, 3, 4 process. The ideas that are more known will go through that process faster because there's more knowns.
Yes.
And the ones that are further out will probably take you longer to go through that because there's more unknowns and more assumptions that you're going to have to test along the way.
So what's interesting, like I'm seeing a parallel here in the direct response publishing world. There's this business model that's really developed since the 90s. And I'm thinking of one specific company, but it started as like, okay, we have this company, we have a successful publisher. Okay, we kind of have run into some kind of growth limit for this little company. But what if we duplicated the model and then we cross promoted between the two companies that are sharing the same ownership structure, sharing the same, top level corporate structure. And importantly, it's more of a Horizon 1 because it's sharing all the same resources, it's sharing the same back end, but they operate as two different brands within the umbrella. And the biggest company in the space, they started growing a bunch of these brands from within. They gave the capacity for people to innovate. So, okay, you have a new voice that you'd like to bring into the marketplace. You have access to all of our resources, but it's duplicating the same, or it's tapping into all of those bigger resources. Yeah. And then the Horizon 2 and Horizon 3 innovation is much less likely. They're more likely to acquire a competitor that may be able to grow faster through accessing the big resources. So the question that came up as you were describing that, like, this is excellent. The question that came up is, if I'm launching a startup today, right? And I feel like I have some innovation in the marketplace. Let's say, without spilling too many beans, let's say I have an innovation in like a financial technology, the financial technology market. So there is I could bootstrap it myself. I could try to like do this innovative thing myself, and maybe I could bring in some investors, that might give me some resources that allow me to do that. Versus I could connect with some big company that maybe has their thing going, but maybe for them, this would be a Horizon 2, Horizon 3 innovation. Like, what are the advantages and disadvantages for somebody who is an innovative entrepreneur to taking those different paths? I mean, you've seen a lot of people go those ways.
So a lot of the what we've learned in innovation and what I apply in like my work with Nelnet and other corporates, I've learned from the startup realm. I've learned what it takes to get something off the ground in that. And there's a lot of differences within the corporate environment, as you're talking about. And a lot of those kind of outside the normal kind of key things that a corporate does, the transformational kind of stuff, they're typically not good at it because they have hired for, a type of person that knows how to run this particular business model or has access to, that particular type of customer, et cetera. And so they're really optimizing an engine that they know. The further you get out there, more transformational, the more I recommend that you take a look outside, because again, there's probably folks that are running faster or doing things differently that and have more understanding of the nuances than you would have to as a corporate, doing something over here and then having to come over to here. And so sometimes it's better to keep your eyes and ears on what's going on outside your realm, even outside your industry. I think a lot of corporates fall down because they focus on what are the competitors and the startups in their industry, where there's plenty of startups and plenty of ideas out there that are in adjacent industries or different industries that they could leverage or buy or put into place that would change the industry itself, because most corporates are not necessarily looking outside. And that's why I named it Inside Outside, is because both are important and both are required, I think, in today's changing world.
The classic example of that for me is the drive-through window. I mean, they existed on banks. They existed on banks for almost as long as there were cars, right? And then it wasn't Ray Kroc, contrary to popular opinion. There was some hamburger guy, I think in Oklahoma or Texas, maybe it's somewhere along Route 66, like looked at the bank drive-through and then went back and looked at a highway side hamburger stand and all the people driving past it and said, "What if?"
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know, and then took the saw to the side of the brick building and said, "Oh, here's a window. Order here," and completely transformed the hamburger stand and then what we know of as fast food today. And so that's an example of going completely outside of your industry and saying, "That's an interesting innovation. How can I bring that forward?"
And then from an individual perspective, it's also, we encourage our corporates to get out and be a part of the startup ecosystem, mentor at accelerators and go to pitch events and that, because you start learning some of the skills and some of the things that entrepreneurs do naturally, or as part of what they have to do to kind of get a business off the ground. And you can start
Yeah.
taking those tools and taking those skills and applying it to what you're building in your own existing engine, for example.
Yeah. Well, and I think eh, like you're familiar with the roles of like visionary versus implementer, right?
Yep.
And I think what I've seen, or at least my bias in corporate, is you end up with this pull towards people who are more implementer oriented, right? And the bigger the company, the more important it is that everybody thinks in system thinking and doesn't step too far outside of their box. Um, and there's that, and for me, from the entrepreneurial side, most entrepreneurs I know are diagnosable with ADHD if they haven't already been, like me. And we could all use a little bit more implementer,
Yeah.
a little bit more influence. So there's this give and take, this push and pull that happens. So, like, having run you would call like In Motion and Innovation Accelerator,
Yeah.
having run that where it's more focused on startups, and then being in the director of innovation role at Nelnet, like how how do these innovation accelerators work? Like,
Yeah.
and what's the how can we understand them, I guess?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally it goes back to, there are two core engines that you're trying to make work. And the innovation engine is full of unknowns. At
Yeah.
the earliest stages, it's all about exploration. It's about
Yeah.
figuring out who's the customer, what's the problem they really have, how do I deliver that value, what do I have to have in place to make that all happen. All that's mostly unknown at an early stage kind of startup or a new idea. As that idea gets fleshed out, and as you start having customers and you start building systems and that, it starts moving closer and closer to the world of the execution side, which is more the traditional business side, the more MBA kind of focused.
Okay.
And ideas have to go along that particular path. Very few ideas, come out of the head of somebody and immediately are 100% foolproof, executable. Let's optimize and keep going. And so that's really the key. It's like, how do you move from exploration to engagement, or exploration to the execution side of things? And I think that's
Yeah.
where both sides, whether it's an entrepreneur or a corporate, kind of sometimes in the middle, knock heads, and it's the challenging part. But if you can get past that exploration phase to a point where you can, accelerate that and expand it, that's when you create real growth and real value creation. And that's the ultimate goal for any entrepreneur, is probably to get through the exploration phase so that they can execute and create something of real value.
Yeah. So it's about, and that does tie back to the three engines of innovation that you do talk about in the book. I mean, so you explore the ideas. And I love the grounding and kind of eternal principles here, because there's a book by James Webb Young that's a technique for producing ideas. And it's all about advertising and coming up with ideas for writing advertising. And it's kind of the same thing. You explore. First, you're trying to get all these inputs, and then you engage, you play with the ideas, you connect the dots between seemingly disparate ideas. There's a copywriter, John Carlton, that calls it incongruous juxtaposition, taking two ideas that may seem like they don't fit together and forcing them and seeing what happens. And then you experiment, you put it in the market as quickly as possible so that you can get that traction, so that you can get that.
Well, and I think that's where corporates fall down. They immediately jump to the fact, oh, I've got to have a perfect plan. And so I'll spend 6 months and come up with a 300-page business plan, and they'll do that all in the boardroom, and then they'll feel like they can launch it. Well, whatever they launch is probably not going to be right, because they've spent 6 months not talking to anybody or thinking about it, versus actually getting out there, testing it, and seeing what assumptions were right and what assumptions were wrong. Because inevitably you're going to have assumptions that are wrong in that particular process. I think this process also, the 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of allows, gives permission for corporates and or early stage entrepreneurs to kind of be okay with the failure that's going to happen, because most ideas are not going to get to a place. But it's much easier to say, okay, I spent 2 hours on it. I'm not interested in it, or there's 20 other competitors. I don't really want to go down that path. And so I'm just going to kill the idea at 2 hours, versus having to build out the business plan and figure out how I'm going to execute on it and all this other stuff, and then launching and finding out you're wrong. Well, let's accelerate that process so that you're putting more ideas into your funnel. You're figuring out which ones have traction, and you're doubling down on the ones that are actually showing evidence that you can move them forward. And again, that applies to entrepreneur or
Yeah. So the point of the 1, 2, 3, 4 is not necessarily to say like, oh, we're going to spend a minute, then we're going to spend 2 hours, then we're going to spend 3 days, then we're going to spend 4 weeks. It is at the end of 1 minute, you say, is this worth 2 more hours?
Right.
And then at the end of 2 hours, is this worth 3 more days? And 3, 4. Yeah. You get the point.
And the numbers are largely irrelevant. I mean, you could take 2 minutes, you could take 3 days, whatever. Yeah. It's more about the systematic approach to saying, taking a stop at the end of that set time and saying, what have I learned? What do I need to learn? Is it worth spending the next amount of cycles to learn that next thing? And if it is, I'm going to take the next bet and go from there. And it's a lot of what we learn from betting on startups. It's almost like that seed investment. And then if they get traction and they show some customers, well, maybe they get their Series A, and then so on and so forth. At each particular stage, they're asking the marketplace and they're asking their team in that, is it worth the additional investment to move the idea forward to create that value along the way? So
all of this kind of leads to a question that should have probably been in the beginning, which is and it's a question I've been avoiding. How do you define innovation in the context of all of this? It seems like, so you've given us a framework to go through the process of innovation, but what is the definition? How do we think about this to make ourselves more effective with it?
So again, I think a lot of people get hung up on the word innovation because it doesn't mean anything, or it means everything. Or some people jump to immediately having to come up with flying cars. So, the way I define innovation in the book is, innovation is basically just taking your ideas and creating value from those ideas. But it's the process of doing that. You can't just have an idea. You got to take the idea and do something to create value from that. And that's innovation. You can do that in a company. In your existing job, there's always problems. There's always opportunities that you can say, hey, if I solve that, I can create value. And so you can do it when you have a lot of knowns, and you can do it in the environment where it's like, hey, I've got a brand new idea to how to change the world. That applies. Now, how you get there and the time it takes to get there and what you need along the way may differ, but the fundamental innovation of taking an idea and incrementally moving it forward to create value, that's the process that we want to talk about and accelerate in everybody.
Okay. And so in that context, like how can I turn an idea into value? There's innovation that can happen in products and in offers, which is not necessarily just the product itself. In marketing, in the business model, there's innovation kind of across the board.
So
yeah,
go ahead.
Go on. No.
I was just going to say, like, there's certain, I guess, skill sets in that you can start thinking about that if either you have now or you can build upon. I call them the Accelerator superpowers. Basically, it's like, how do you increase your curiosity so that you're, again, having access to new ideas and new people and new networks? How do you build your optimism? Because entrepreneurs know that, every day is a slog and you're never going to get everything right because you're working in a lot of unknowns. And so how do you stay optimistic around the fact that even if one of your assumptions isn't valid, you can test something else, or you can come up with another idea.
Yeah.
So optimism, resourcefulness. At the earliest stages, you're never going to have the resources that you need. So how do you stay resourceful around it? Resilient, knowing for a fact that, again, most of these ideas are going to fail, but how do you keep pushing forward ideas that are showing evidence of success? How do you stay customer driven, or focus on the stakeholder of whoever has that problem? How can I solve that for them? Action oriented, basically, it doesn't matter if you have an idea, you have to take action on that idea to actually create value. And then finally, the last superpower is really collaborative. How do you, nobody builds a company or nobody builds something of real value without working with others. So how do you, engage with others to both vet your ideas as well as find the right resources and tools that you need to move the idea forward?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a whole set of skill sets for dealing with failure, but because innovation does involve so much, like I think of them like little failure versus big failure. Like
Yeah.
failure with a capital F is, I don't even know what it is. It's just like giving up, right?
Well,
But
there's failure from incompetence or knowing that you should have done something different, perhaps,
yeah,
or failure from the standpoint of we had an assumption, we tested it, it was wrong. Okay, we learned from that particular experiment. And it's really about how do you accelerate that learning process, knowing that a lot of the learning itself comes from the fact that you don't know something until you
yeah,
do.
yeah.
And so that process of learning.
Okay. So you've been connected like with obviously you've been involved in the venture capital or in the corporate funded startup, if we can put it
Sure.
in air quotes there. So like a capital driven startup. And you've also been connected with lots of more like bootstrap small businesses, whether they're in tech or something else. How does innovation fit like in those different contexts? Are there different approaches that you might take going through this process with someone who may feel like, okay, I have like my runway is like the $5,000 startup capital that I'm willing to
Sure.
commit to this
Yeah.
versus my runway is $2 million that was given to me, that's somebody else's
Yeah.
money. Like how do you play with these things in that context?
I think a lot of it goes down to, again, what type of ideas are you trying to move through the funnel? There's nothing wrong with having a $5,000 idea and creating a, $10,000 value for you as the entrepreneur, a new training series or something like that. But
Yeah.
that particular idea may not be venture fundable from the standpoint of, an outside investors looking at putting capital in and having a, 100x return on that capital. So a lot of the stuff that goes, I think a lot of people get hung up or um, get on the wrong track. Sometimes they think they need venture capital when that particular idea is never really going to get the type of notice from a venture capital type of person, because they're looking for, again, 100x types of returns. And those are different types of ideas, usually transformational types of ideas, rather than plenty of businesses out there that can be started without having to go to a venture capital person to make that happen. And I
Yeah.
think what this process allows you to do is, again, you can be on any of those particular paths, but what the process allows you to do is to, again, incrementally think through are you at on that particular path, and what's that next bet? Does the next bet have to be $100 million, or can it be, $1,000 bet?
Yeah.
And as you grow up and move the business forward, those bets may become bigger as you show traction and evidence that you're onto something that you may want to scale at some point.
Okay. Um, I guess one of the preconceptions that we've talked about already, but that maybe we're thinking about is so a lot of us do think of innovation as something that happens through technology, right? We think of,
Mhm.
okay,
Right.
innovation equals technology, but there are plenty of non-tech businesses that benefit from the same process. So how do those two different contexts inform it, or are we all technology businesses?
Yeah.
Because here I am talking to you on Zoom. We're going to publish this through YouTube and through uh,
Yes.
podcast RSS feeds and all of that.
So my belief is technology. It used to be a vertical,
Yeah,
something within a company that even, there was a person in charge of technology. Um, One of the big disruptions, and I talk about this in the book, is the fact that anybody has access to this technology now. And you think about no code tools, or, even access to markets, marketing systems and things along those lines, where 10 years ago, those were not possible. And so
Yeah.
literally everybody is tech enabled in such that they can take their idea and start experimenting with it and seeing if they're onto something and testing those assumptions and growing and building stuff. I joke when I talk on stage, I pull out my iPhone and say, how many of you have an iPhone out there? And everybody raises their hand. And it's like, okay, so how much value do you have in your pocket? Do you have any idea? What would it have cost in 1986 to have all this in your pocket? And you could go back and look at the Radio Shack ads back in the 80s, and the fax machine and the video recorder and everything else. And you're literally walking around with, $150,000 worth of equipment that, in only 20 years ago. And then you double that from the standpoint of, say, okay, how much value is all access to all the world's knowledge? Well, you have that too in your pocket. The fact that in 86, you would have had to have a supercomputer, a Cray supercomputer, to have that same computing power as you have in your pocket. And that was $32 million. So you're literally walking around with $32 million of value outside of all the knowledge of the world in your pocket. That alone changes the landscape of what can be built, who can build it. And it's both optimistic and terrifying at the same time, because, the world is changing so fast.
One of my favorite things that I discovered in the course of one bit of research into computing technology was Deep Blue, the supercomputer that beat Garry Kasparov in chess in the late 90s, if I'm remembering right. Yep. In 2013, I believe that was the right year, the iPhone that came out that year had as much computing power that you were sticking in your pocket.
Yep.
as this world famous supercomputer. Well, that's excellent. And so now we all have even more powerful supercomputers.
Yeah, no excuse not to innovate anymore.
So let's transition into where folks can get more from you. Obviously there is, and I'll make sure to include all of these links in the description. Obviously there's the book itself, which is Accelerated, a guide to innovating at the speed of change that goes much deeper into what we've talked about here. Yeah, I have the Kindle ebook version, so mine doesn't look as pretty. So where do folks go to learn about the book and more about you?
Yeah, so the easiest way is to go to ardinger.com. It's got information about the book. It also links to our podcast, which is at insideoutside.io. We publish that basically weekly, and have been doing so way before podcasts were cool. And so we've had a chance to really talk to some of the best and the brightest in the world of innovation through those years. And we also publish a weekly newsletter called the IO newsletter. And I encourage people to, tap into that. Each week we push out at least, 10 or 12 stories that we are curating every week, and along with other information that we're seeing in the world of innovation. And then finally, I'm pretty easy to see on LinkedIn and at Ardinger on Twitter. Happy to connect with folks any way I can.
Excellent. And I know that, it's very easy for us in kind of the marketing world to think of the next campaign, the next offer, and not step back and arguably do the exact same thing that your podcast name suggests. We can think inside of our industry, and we can think about the right things to do from inside of our industry, but also get inspiration from, get ideas from, and connect to people outside of the industry, including folks in the startup world and in the technology world. And so I'd strongly recommend folks. I mean, you're a trusted source. You are a force to be reckoned with on the Silicon Prairie. And so I'd strongly encourage folks to learn from you and to go deeper.
Thanks, Roy.
Yep. Thank you, Brian, for being here. And thank you to everyone who's engaged with this episode of Breakthrough Marketing Secrets. I'd love to hear even just one big takeaway that you have from listening to Brian speak today. And I'd encourage you to check out more at the links in the description. Thanks, and I'll see you again next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you once again for tuning in to this daily episode of Breakthrough Marketing Secrets. Remember, check out the links with this episode for even more value. Now make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, and engage in every way you can to keep this show going and growing and delivering daily value to you. I'll catch you soon for your next big breakthrough.